Thanks of all for invitation. It's really, I'm really happy to be here and have this special opportunity to share my thoughts connected with this rather new project, still developing. So I will be really grateful for any of your comments. As I said, it's quite new, so it's presentation of the project and some of my ideas how I will try to deal with this. It's difficult from my particular point of view because till now I was working mainly on post-war period. So dealing with this pre-1945 era, it's something new in a sense that I have to work with a little bit different sources and with a little bit different research problems also. So the context changed, but why the question why I take this opportunity to move a little bit, taking into account chronology. I have to admit that I was working on family all the time. So this war situation was short 5 years. It was something like a big gap in the whole story. So it's like this project is the attempt to fill this gap a little bit even. Okay, I would like to start with a little bit more general aspect of it. So the starting point, which is connected with the general statement about the development of the historiography dedicated to the Second World War era, especially in this part dedicated to social history. And unfortunately, this is not only my thoughts, my ideas, but people who are working on the subject since years, they have this feelings that some aspects of the whole story is completely neglected, and we should get back to the sources also, to find and to ask some new questions. So first of all, it's the questions. This is the need of diversification of research questions dedicated to that time, but also to move a little bit more to, as they said, everyday life experience and attitudes and behaviors. Of course, what is quite important, I will move to it in a minute, the very important context of the development of the research on the Second World War right now is the research on Holocaust, and this is the main point of reference for all of them. And we have to remember about it. So so this is the general context when we are thinking about the development of historiography, not only about Polish, so mainly about Polish historiography on this era, but I would like to start with also the second thought connected with that, which is the statement about the context of this special development of the research approaches. So the first factor I found as a very important in this, or something which pushed me to this field. It's the factor of change, as I call it, which is generally speaking the research on post-war period and some findings which even show the Second World War as very important for changing the social transformation of the post-war era. And this is the statement by Małgorzata Fidelis, who was working on the single woman in Poland after the Second World War, and she said, the single woman was such a widespread phenomenon during and after the war in Europe that it might be even called a new demographic phenomenon. Owing to their vast number, they could only cease to be marginalized and civic status had to lose significance. This situation had major consequences. Above all, it gave permission to be socially active and forced independence. The situation in Poland did not differ considerably from the European average. In 1946, there was 2.3 million more Polish women than men. So 1 million more than in 1931. It's very important context of it, but not only one. The second point, like this, when we are thinking about transformation, this factor of transformation, which is much more visible from this context of I miss it here, from the point of view of Polish People's Republic in the history. And this is the statement from the other quite important book, which is written by Martin Zaremba. And it shows somehow the very strong opinions about the situation of society, Polish society in 1945. So I will quote it. The first source of trauma stemmed from this disintegration and atomization, the consequence of wartime deportation and resettlements. So the disruption of mid-range types, professional, local, environmental. In case of forced laborers and prisoners of war, also family types, which most often involve the disintegration or disappearance of entire groups and communities. And even stronger, he said, as a consequence, already during the war, Polish society began to resemble magma, which became fluid when the post-war returns and migration began. So it's very strong opinion about everything what happened during the war, and it's somehow he said that it's really hard to compare Polish society between 1939 and 45, even forgetting about the whole transformation connected with Holocaust and mass murdering during the war. So what is discussed right now around the discussion around the era of the Second World War, it's something between two statements. The first one is said that Polish society was extremely heroic during the war. And the second point said, no, it is, truly speaking, only magma. And there are people who are able to kill for simply speaking, bread, for example. So those two, I was wondering where is truth and what happened during the war, what changed the society to how it's changed during this fight, long years. And of course, the third quite important factor connected with that, we have to remember that and this is somehow the point, a very important point of reference for me, because as you know very well, the part of development of historiography of the Second World War right now, and not only Second World War, also 30s, for example, is the development of the history of the Holocaust. And especially in case of Poland, and in case of such a historiography I would try to do is extremely important. So I chose this book as a point of reference because they use also a very specific way of working with the sources using this microhistoriographic approach. And they were very successful using it. So And this is also the statement which I try to emphasize here. They support very strongly the statement by Marcin Zaremba. So the research carried out shows that in the area of research interest to us, so they were working, for example, on this districts, the vast majority of Jews who try to say themselves based on the case examined and verified were killed at the hand of Poles and were killed with participation of Poles. So this is still the context of my research. Questions? Okay. So what I would like to do is, first of all, going beyond the state of art. And state of art, I try to show you what is expected and what wasn't done till now. And the first problem which we as historians were trying to deal with everyday life and family history and as well women's history, etc., at the time, it's the problem of somehow connected with sources which, as a result, push the historians to the everyday life of social history of metropolises. So what are people usually trying to do? They usually focus on Krakow, Warsaw, Vilnius, Lvov, for example. Big cities with a huge amount of sources, huge amount of testimonies also. So what I would like to do is to move to small towns and villages rather to better understand what happened there between these heroic attitudes and magma. The second point, which is the very bad part, like the sad story of Polish historiography on the time, mainly Polish, but it's changing right now. But yeah, dedicated to Polish lands under occupation. This is the very strong domination of perspective of intelligentsia. So we have a story, interesting story of families' fate during the war from the very strong perspective of these upper classes. So we don't know, truly speaking, what happened in the small villages or even in the suburbs of these big cities. So, and it's to some extent, it's a rather repetitive story. So we omit or marginalize, as Anna Kofer said, situation of craftsmen, workers, peasants, etc., etc. And what is quite interesting right now is that it is set in the environment that probably we should not better to try even to start digging it, because we could find something quite unpleasant. Let's go. Okay, and the second point, when we are trying to challenge the story, it's the completely neglected story or general story of family life during the occupation. And what I would like to stress is that we have a lot of stories dedicated to particular groups, especially connected with these traumatic experiences like rogue children, forced laborers, members of underground, especially, or intelligentsia themselves, because they left so many sources, so many fascinating letters or for example, memoirs. Instead, I would like to trace the transformation that took place at the micro level in the family, in the household. It's quite difficult. I tried still to find the best way. I will try to show you how I will try. So what is quite important here also, what I would like to emphasize here, that and it's also like a strong context and a point of reference for me, is there is something like contrasting with what Marcin Zaremba said about this magma. There is something like a general dominated opinion that nothing has happened, that this family did not change at all, that there was nothing like revolutionary revolution, moral revolution or customs revolution, whatever. And what is usually said about marriage, for example, is the marriage as a means of survival, that's all. So we know, I still have this opinion that we know nothing and this is the result of it. So it's still a question. Maybe finally in a few years I will say, yes, that's true. Probably nothing really changed. And even this micro transformation, which I already noticed, this is not the part of something like a huge transformation, but nothing has happened, I couldn't agree. So this is the starting point. Okay, of course, thanks to, first of all, Maren Reger and her works on from this gender history of war in this relation, German-Polish relation, mainly during the Second World War. We have even already set of questions she put in her book and then articles. Contrasting with these statements, these general dominated statements about stable family which survive everything and nothing has happened during the war, she said that the Second World War radically transformed Poland, its borders, infrastructure, demography, etc., etc. Both occupation regimes permanently damaged the country's social structure, and the bonds between people, families, and family structure were destroyed at almost every town, village, home suffered losses. Neighborhood ties were torn apart by deportation, etc., etc. And here you have these two questions, which are quite important for me personally. How did the period of occupation change the gender order in local society, and how did it affect power relations, family life, and even family planning? So this gender perspective is quite important also for me. What I would like to add to that, it's not like something separate, but quite important in the gender context, is biopolitics, which I'm rather interested in anyway. So it's we have to remember about this depopulation policy. I would like to only remind you about the this policy of reducing or liquidating the system of care, clinics, etc., etc. So the politics which discourage Polish families. I'm talking about mainly Polish families here. As a very important part of this politics. I miss it, I think, to tell very strikingly at the beginning of my presentation that it's, how it was also stressed in the title, it's mainly about Polish families. And the next context, also quite important, it's the history of sexuality and intimacy. This is again the subject completely neglected in the context of Polish historiography, of Polish lands. And Maren Reger, she was talking about it in a sense that it should be developed in a way how it was done about Dagmar Herzog and Elisabeth Heinemann in the context of Nazi Germany. The problem is still when we are going deeper into the subject that unfortunately we still don't have, or we will never have comparable sources which will get us this possibility to research that in the same way. But still we would try somehow, and we have some approaches to that, to develop it somehow. So what I would like so how this my main methodological concept developed and how it looked like right now. So the main point of study, or main point of interest in my case, is the microhistory here. So I do not believe that we are able to generalize the families' experiences based on the different studies spread around, even only if we choose general government. We have to focus, as it was done in case of Grabowski and Engelking works, on a very small or rather regional region, to go deeper and to recognize these micro situations as such. It's really hard to universalize somehow the very different stories from around the whole Polish people's pre-war Polish People's Republic, Polish Republic, and write one story of family under occupation. So microhistory is very important. Decentralization, in the sense that I'm like giving up the metropolis and trying to find the best region to focus on. I'm still on the way to choose the best one, or 2, 3 best ones. The second point is biographical perspective. I will show you how I try to do that. How it helped me to understand it. It's quite important here in the case of family, to understand the private and intimate experience. We could say everything or try to explain how family develop, how many children usually people have. But what is quite important for me, it's this mutual relations between people. And it's really hard to say anything without their own voices here. Everyday practices, it's something which is quite general, I know about it, but this everyday life of family, especially in this economic context and political context, will be very important, and I will show you also in my example. And what is quite important as a very last part of this general conceptualization, it's the taking into account the integrated history. What does it mean for me? It's to take into account the very diverse antagonic interaction in the society. So writing what is usually done in history of Polish land under occupation, it's separate stories of Jews, separate stories of Poles, Ukrainians, etc., etc. I know that it's really hard to write it together because they have the completely different faith. But on the other hand, those people were living nearby, and they could observe one another, and it somehow there was an impact of those lives and what they observe for their own life. So it's even if we have only this, we should remember about those people and about the neighborhood. It's much more general metaphors. Okay. Okay, so to be more specific, I just pointed out some most important areas which I'm trying to follow in the sources right now, and general questions, research problems, let's call it. I move a little bit and give up children from the very beginning of this research study. I try to take into account the childhood as a very important part of it, but still I have my children somewhere there as the authors of the sources, but probably I will focus more on parents, especially on women. So what is quite important for me is first of all, responsibility for supporting the family, married women's work, decision to marry, motives, resignations, single parents, not formal relationships. It's something quite important here, something which could be the sign of transformation. Widowhood, again, completely neglected. It wasn't even treated as an important factor of family transformation. Parenthood, generally speaking, and psychological material consequences of that death in a family. connected with parenthood child. I think that without it, it will be really difficult to deal with history of family. Okay. What is quite important, of course, in the whole story is the problem of sources of these testimonies. How many information we are really able to find there. Even if I don't like it, I will have to change a little bit my way of work. This is also a question to you as an audience, if according to your experience, it will be possible, especially that I was working and spent 2-3 years last year working on experts' knowledge. It's a different story. But what is, of course, as I said, the most important point of reference here is the case of autobiographical sources. Thanks God, I would say that in Poland we have the oral history boom right now. So the collections of different stories, autobiographical stories, we have in thousands right now, or even more, and as well as the so-called social archives developed quite quickly, and the photos you have here on the right hand, yes, your right hand, it's the example of sources which we could find, simply speaking, in open social archive, not in the state archive, but social archives. So the family stories are there also. Why these autobiographical stories? It seems to be obvious, but I will stress it even more. And quote here Paul Thompson, who said, "To the greatest extent possible, oral history can transform family history." And I think that not only oral history, but generally speaking, autobiographical stories. Without the data it provides, historians can say very little about relationships within the family or the daily context between its members and distant relatives and neighbors. The role of husband and wife, the upbringings of boys and girls, conflicts and forms of emotional and material dependence, the struggle of the young for independence, courtship, sexual behavior within and outside marriage, contraception and abortion, all these areas were would be inaccessible in practice. The only clue could be gleaned from statistical summarized and from few observers, usually biased, he said. The related poverty of historical research was well summed up by Michael Anderson in his brilliant, speculative but abstract work, Family Structure in 19th Century Lancashire. He compared it to the skewed blank picture frame. I like this quotation very much, and I think it's very important for the whole story of family, and it also explains somehow why it's still neglected in the history of in Polish historiography. Of course, to develop the whole story, we need other archives and other sources, and of course, courts archives, which I'm very well acquainted with, let's call it, and I found it extremely useful in this case. Private archive collection, as I said, state and I hope church archives, but I don't believe it will happen, but I will try. Okay, so short example how, do I still have some time? Okay, so I will try to be very quick. Yeah. Okay, so what is the most, I will give you some very simple example of the sources and the individual story in the source. So what is mostly characteristic and recurrent in case of biographical sources, including those of protagonists I'm most interested in, from outside the centers, so not intelligentsia, not metropolitan cities, is always the dispersion, I use this word, dispersion of the family. What is usually used in case of Polish families as the transformation means separation, separated families. I would use in the majority of cases I've already studied about dispersion of the family. Because this is very often not direct result of something like we call political involvement or result of economy, but particularly the result of economic arrangements, attempts to cope with the situation, etc., etc. So I will give you the example. So in the notes of Teresa Drzymała, born in 1927 and a resident of Częstochowa, or rather of the suburb of Częstochowa, we can observe such a dispersal. She was the fourth daughter of bricklayer, a seasonal worker who undertook any odd different jobs. And her mother, who already before the war earned her family living selling devotional items near Jasna Góra to survive during the winter. The older children had to take care of the younger ones, and all the sisters together were responsible for herding the goat. Goat breadwinner mother, this goat was called. The children finished several forms of primary school before the war and began to learn a trade. So Tereska, she was 12 years old in 1939. As she herself recalls, quotation on 1st September 1939, while I was herding goat in a ditch, I heard over the radio from my neighborhood that war had broken out. End of quotation. Although Tereska was much more attached to her father as a little girl, in the part of her memories, it was written in 1975, dedicated to this period of occupation, her father disappears from the narrative completely. There is no father there, even she was this lovely girl of father as a young one. There is no indication of his fate. Perhaps he had already left home for a longer time before the war in search of work. It was our mother, quotation, who traded everything she could in order to support us, end of quotation. It is mother who supports the family, smuggling food across the border between the general government and the Reich, and her daughter helps her in this. The mother eventually ended up in the women's prison in Lubliniec with a sentence of 11 months for this smuggling. This forced separation from mother means that the teenage daughters automatically take over the chores. We sowed a field that had previously been leased. We sowed rye, millet, potatoes. The sister had a lot of company, sometimes as boys. She's writing about boys, speaking. Sometimes they organized private parties even. The eldest sister, end of quotation, the eldest sister left for Germany to work, persuaded by our neighbor, Tereska said, a Volksdeutscher. When the narrator finished school, so Tereska finished school, at the persuasion of a friend, again, persuasion of a friend, she went to work in textile factory in Naschen abroad, so in the Reich. So when we try to analyze this story, in the case of Drzymała family, it's difficult to call this process of transformation of this family as breaking up of it. But the bond between parents disappears completely for duration of war. The family is run by mother, but each of the children decides their own fate. So the daughters decided what they want to do. Can we call these dancing parties organized by daughters and who inviting boys over their mother's sense to be kind of decline in discipline or demoralization? This does not seem justified for me, nor does the narrator notice it. Rather, it could be considered the norm in working class home where daughters are waiting for probably the fiancés. The family changes its character, probably also under the influence of girls growing up during the war. So that's something I would like to stress here, these two aspects which I usually miss somehow from the story. So first of all, what we could notice here, comparing with this dominated one, it's diversity of family patterns. So taking into account this general intelligentsia patterns, we would say that this that the behavior of the children could be called as demoralized, for example, or they would be called as demoralized. Here we have completely different pattern, and we have to be aware of it. And the second point, which is already missed, so we are not sometimes, I got this impression that we miss the general idea that family changed during the time. And the, for example, children leaving home are treated as those part of family who leave this house because of the war. So we should be careful with that here. I'm not sure here, for example, if the girls left home because of war, or probably during the peacetime, they also could leave home at the age of 17, 16 or 17 years old. So what we have usually something like that. From this autobiographical point of view, different stories, of course, written by mother or daughter or small child, boy, girl, etc., etc. So the next point is what to do with them, even if we believe in this story or not. So what I plan to do is use this autobiographical relation as a starting point. The second step will be, in this case, searching the region, recognizing the geographical area, situation during the war in this particular part of the country. And the third step, to be this so-called traditional historian and to dig as much as possible. So to recognize the history of the family, the particular members of the family history of particular members of this family. Here, the father, story of the father, the sister, especially the sister who was in the forced labor, etc., etc. I started to do that. Partly it's successful, partly not at all. So it depends very much on the history and the state of archives in the particular region we are talking about. This is the very, as I said, very beginning of it, and it's somehow, of course, I'm planning also the interviews with the family members, this oldest one right now, because the author died already, unfortunately. But I think that the basis for fundament of success in this case, it's finding the unfortunately good, very rich archives to develop this, the history of this family. I know that it's rather work which recalls the journalist work, and it meets somehow this developed methodological context of it. But I think that in this case, I'm not sure you agree with me or not, this is the only way. Thank you very much.